Welcome, everybody, to the latest episode of the Union Federation podcast here on the Fandom Podcast Network and the BQN. Of course, this podcast covers everything that's happening in Star Trek and the Orville, which June 2nd, we are just days away finally from the premiere of season 3 of the Orville New Horizons. We are extremely excited for that, and we've got some plans for that coming up, and we're going to talk about those shortly. But first, before anything, I need a top-notch crew to run this ship. And of course, returning this week, our ship's counselor, the queen of the BQN. The N stands for Nelson, Miss Amy Nelson.
Well, hello there.
How are you doing, Amy?
Doing great. I've started my summer vacation, so let the fun begin.
Now, are you properly recovered from all of your birthday tidings from the last week?
Yes, I am. That was so much fun. I enjoyed listeners seeing the motion picture on the big screen with some Star Trek friends down in San Diego. It was just wonderful. I hope you also enjoyed the motion picture on the big screen because we don't get to see that very often.
Yeah, and I believe the 4K version is now out on disc as well as on Paramount Plus. So if you have a streaming, you can get on 4K. Now, I got to just take a quick second though and take a detour back to Planet Earth, because you also saw what is the movie most everybody's talking about right now. But you didn't you see it like in a special box or something like that? And of course, I'm talking about Top Gun Maverick.
Well, I thought it was going to be that, but it was just an extra early showing on the Wednesday before it was officially released on Friday. So
yeah, God, well, you got special privilege. So
yes.
we're all a little jealous. But you know what? Coming back to this week, our science officer, and we're going to need her this week, ladies and gentlemen, because she's got some science homework ahead of her on this episode. Of course, she's also a whiz on the phasers, which we might need to because we've got some pesky Gorn running around here, and our security officer is still honeymooning. I think that's an eternal honeymoon. He'll be back next week for the Orville. Don't worry. But joining us too is, of course, the lovely Hayley Stoddard. Hayley.
Hello. Yes, this episode, Hail Science, is all I have to say. It's fantastic. I'm excited to be here. Amy, I love getting to go see movies beforehand, working in a movie theater for like 2 years. Did it all the time.
Nice.
Yeah, super awesome. Nice to see that.
It's always fun. Guys, we don't have a lot of Star Trek news. It's been pretty quiet on the Trek front news-wise. The Orville...
No, we do have Star Trek news, and it's bad news.
Well, are we talking about London?
Yes.
Okay, I was going to try not to be downer news on a holiday weekend, but Amy, if you want to at least bring it up, because I do know we have a lot of London listeners out there, and I saw this and I felt really bad for them because I was a little shocked.
Yes, I am too. So Destination Star Trek London convention has been canceled. The official statement says, we have decided to run just one big Destination Star Trek event this year. This means that Destination Star Trek Germany, taking place from the 23rd to 25th September, will be the one official European Star Trek event in 2022. We know that this will be disappointing to some of you, but we look forward to new Star Trek events in the future in the UK. It continues to go on. I don't really believe that they're handling it that well because the tickets have not been refunded. They've been transferred to another event that you may or may not want to go to. There's just a lot of questionable actions going on over there, and I feel very bad for
There's something else going on, because the only reason why I ask is we just had a big convention here in Florida called MegaCon. It's one of the big ones of the year, and unfortunately there are a lot of people, including several of the guests, who reported testing positive for COVID after this convention. Now I have heard rumors. I wasn't there. I'm not going to confirm anything about distancing and mask use and stuff like that. I'm not going to go into rumor mongering, but it seems like that maybe while we are still getting back to normal from COVID, that maybe big group things are still a little bit, but I get the feeling there's a little bit more to it than that. Hayley, do you have some thoughts?
Brexit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they keep saying, yeah. And unfortunate as that is a reality that we are dealing with, and it may be a consequence because of that. You can look at with the 55-year mission and CBS saying we will only promote one convention here in the US. So that's why Creation, it got pulled. You could say they started that way, and it may be that the Paramount CBS is only going to do one in the US, one in Europe, that they may have started a trend there. So we could look to that also.
Yeah. But it's hard to say. It's kind of a weird time for Star Trek. I do know this, though. From what I've been kind of following on social media, it looks like we might have some Star Trek Prodigy news here sooner than later regarding the return of Star Trek Prodigy, because our favorite holographic captain's been talking a lot on Twitter lately. So I'm just saying. So hopefully that's some good news, because I think we can all say we really are enjoying Prodigy, and Kevin still hasn't got his stuffed Murph yet, so he's still not a little happy about that. But guys, we got a big episode of Strange New Worlds to talk about here, so I'm going to kick things off with our Quantum Drive. And yes, we are here to talk the 4th episode of Strange New Worlds, Memento Mori. But before we do that, I've got to hit the button. Spoiler warnings ahead. We are going to be diving deep into many aspects of this episode. If you have not had the chance to watch it, get on Paramount Plus, get it watched. It's a phenomenal episode, but so far every episode of Strange New Worlds in my mind has been phenomenal. It's been an amazing ride. Hayley was back last week. Amy, she got to get her talk in about what she thought of the adventures of Captain Shiny Pants so far.
It's true.
That is a running. Trust me, it's not an insult. It is a running joke here on the Union Federation. So we love Anson Mount around here. But let's talk about the latest episode. So I'm going to let you ladies decide. Amy, Hayley, would one of you like to make the latest Captain's Log entry?
Well, how about this? I found the definition, or sort of the explanation, of Memento Mori. So I'll read that, and then you want to do the...
Sure.
All right.
See, we can work it out here on the Union Federation. we have a good crew.
Yeah. So I was like, what in the heck is this Memento Mori? It's obviously some weird language. Oh, yeah, Latin. There it is. The Latin phrase literally means remember that you must die. I'm like, oh, okay. I was thinking, oh, maybe that's to Pike and his, memory. But no. When I keep on reading, the phrase has its origin in ancient Rome, where it is believed that slaves accompanying generals on victory parades whispered the words as a reminder of their commander's mortality to prevent them from being consumed by hubris. So that makes a little more sense with the slaves and the Gorn and the stuff like that going on. So there you have Memento Mori. So
we've continued the first part of education in this episode. We will have further education later. But Hayley, would you care then to give us the episode synopsis in our latest Captain's Log entry?
Of course. The Enterprise crew attempt to deliver a nuclear-powered AP-350 air filter to a Federation colony, but find many of the colonists dead. Security Chief La'an Noonien-Singh helps evacuate the survivors and recognizes that this is a Gorn trap. She is the only survivor of a Gorn attack in her childhood. A Gorn ship attacks, doing significant damage to the Enterprise, with M'Benga and Chapel resorting to 21st century medicine to treat the wounded, including Number One, when their equipment goes offline. They lure the Gorn ship into the atmosphere of a brown dwarf near a black hole, where both ship's sensors and shields are useless. Spock is able to track the Gorn ship and they destroy it, but 3 more Gorn ships arrive. One is crushed by the pressure of the brown dwarf's atmosphere. Spock mind melds with Noonien-Singh to learn about the Gorn's communication system, and they use this trick to trick one ship to fire on the other. Enterprise then warps around the black hole, temporarily disappearing from view, and ejects the destabilizing AP-350, which explodes, and convinces the remaining Gorn ship that Enterprise is destroyed. Science!
Lots of science in this episode, but guys, before we even talk about our reactions, the AP350, isn't that what Dyson uses in their air filters now? I'm just saying.
I have no idea. Maybe.
So, Amy, I'm gonna start with you. Your first reactions to this episode, because I think there was a lot to chew on in this episode, even though it was didn't feel like there was much of an A and a B plot so much as there was just the A plot, but I think it was a very important A plot this week.
Yeah, the suspense of everything was pretty darn awesome, down to the bridge, down to the medical bay, down to trying to figure out what happened to the colonists, to what happening on the crew. There was a lot going on. I will be honest and say I got lost, and it wasn't until I watched the Ready Room and understood what was happening with the black hole and the brown star and the gravity and the crushing. Like it, I think for me, being, I guess, I don't know, a little slower or something, I needed more exposition. I needed more telling me what was going on. And so I got a little discombobulated, and I tried to follow the story best I could. But there's definitely some high points for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Amy. I didn't feel lost, but I did feel like it was jumping around a lot because you had a lot going on with the Gorn, with the brown dwarf, with the black hole, with what was going on Enterprise with injuries, and with La'an as well. So I think there was a lot. It was all one big plot, but there was a lot going on within that one story, and they really didn't separate it out, I think, enough in certain aspects. Plus, that's why we have Hayley here, because we not only get her first reactions, but Hayley, can you science us up a little bit on this week's episode?
Definitely. No, this was, like Amy said, a very suspenseful, tense kind of episode. I enjoyed it. I thought it was great. I can see your guys' points as to where sometimes things were like, okay, what's going on, and getting a little confused in the storyline. But I like that it does all work well and flow well together, so overall the episode was really great. There's so much science in this, and I loved it because it was spot on and it was accurate. As opposed to sometimes other stuff is a little timey-wimey stuff. And so this was fantastic. But yeah, we can get into it for sure.
Yeah. So I gotta ask Hayley, because one of the things I really liked about this episode too was the look of the black hole itself within the brown star. I thought they really nailed that look as well, and I think that was very important, instead of just, because I think people, when they think black hole, they still go back to the old classic Disney movie and the look of that and everything like that. And that's not necessary, especially when you're talking about wrapped within this brown dwarf. It really made for a different look for a black hole. And I think they really took the time and effort to nail the scientific look of that while still maintaining, hey, the futuristic of this. And I think that's important, because I think it gives people some different perspective. But I mean, talking about the event horizon, the pressures around as the gravity increases as you get closer to a black hole, a lot where Amy had her was getting her math on at the end of Discovery. I would say, watching this episode, and I'm thinking of you, it's like, oh, Hayley is loving this right now.
Yeah. Well, and that's the one thing. So the visual look of this one kind of reminds me of the one in Interstellar. That kind of same visual. And it's interesting because this episode comes out after we have gotten a look at our own black hole in the middle of our galaxy. And so to kind of take those two images together, I mean, this is a really great representation of a black hole. And yeah, they can all be a little bit different. We have black holes that actually eject material. So sometimes they actually will have streams and jets come out of them as material falls in. Some of it does get ejected back out. And then when you have something like this, where a black hole is feeding on something that's nearby, it does tend to look a little different because it's getting more input essentially. And it's going to have debris around it and things like that as it's pulling stuff in, as opposed to just being out there and kind of moving around. So visually, it was really, really great. I loved it.
Yeah, I love the whole concept of using like the gravity slingshot as well around the black hole. But I did have one question for you, and maybe, ladies, I missed this in the episode. When Spock and La'an go out in the shuttle, I'm like, how is the shuttle surviving those pressures? Because it's not built with even probably not as even as strong as those Gorn fighter ships that crushed under the pressure. So I was kind of wondering about that.
Well, I took it as like the Enterprise was deeper in, and so they were flying away like the opposite direction, so that the pressure was lightening or lessening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's
Well, and
probably right.
also, I mean, when we got to it, the larger Gorn ship almost had stopped right at the edge of where the brown dwarf's mass had started. And so really it sent the smaller ships in and stayed out itself. And so essentially the shuttle, the Galileo, as they say it, it is flown outward. And sometimes it can seem counterintuitive that a smaller object might last longer, but because it's smaller, yes, it seems that it should crush quicker because there's less outward space for it to deflect, essentially. But I think on the flip side, that's what helped it, is the fact that it was smaller and it was able to actually move faster. I mean, if we look at the Enterprise, it really was not moving very fast. By the time they actually made it to the brown dwarf, they were on like impulse speed. So they were moving a lot slower. And so I think that's also why, too.
You know,
that's fair. Go ahead, Amy. No,
Yeah.
that's fair.
I just wanted, when I was watching this and sort of, that whole submarine type of feel and vibe. Yeah, right.
Yes.
It reminded me of course, TNG in Descent Part 2, where Beverly takes the Enterprise into the Starb and using the metaphasic shielding to hide the ship from Borg, right? And because they had this shielding that would protect them. And I loved that, Beverly was like, we're going to do this. I trust the science. I trust the metaphasic shielding. I trust the Enterprise. We're going in. Everyone's like, no, no, no. But she did it. And it was sort of that same feeling with Pike. It's like, he's like, she'll hold. And the Enterprise became a character in this episode. And I loved it because he's like, nope, the Enterprise, she'll hold. And I was like, oh, finally we're getting the ship as a part of the character. And I think this is the introduction of the ship.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point.
My brain went to submarine movies, so I was
Hayley was thinking Hunt for Red October and Crimson Tide.
Yes.
Exactly. Well, and they turned the
sonar. I mean, that
Yeah,
immediately takes you back to the sonar and then going and kind of going over the smaller Gorn ship and then immediately dropping. It's, oh my gosh. And then the aye, sir. Oh my gosh. I was like, aye, skipper. Oh, I loved it. It was great. I think that was the best line ever.
So one other thing I want to point out about this episode before we move on into a couple other things too was I love the fact that they obviously knew when this episode was going to air and they worked in some Memorial Day kind of things, remembering their lost shipmates or from previous servings and everything and everybody had a button they wore from another ship that they served on or had somebody who they lost on served on. I really thought that was an interesting touch, and obviously it fits in with the story, but the fact that this is the episode that comes out before Memorial Day weekend too, I'm sure there was when they realized their schedule, there was some planning around in that as well. So, but I just thought it was a very nice touch in the episode. So
I agree.
I want to talk about the cast. I'm going to pull La'an off of this part of the conversation because we're going to talk about her a little later because she is a major part of this episode. But outside of La'an, who this week stood out to you? Was there anybody this week besides La'an that just kind of stood out to you or grabbed you? Because I'm going to go back to, I thought Ethan Peck actually was really good at Spock this week. He felt like he's starting to get back into his Spock groove, but he's kind of getting away a little bit from the Discovery Spock, and we're starting to see him transition a little bit to more of the original series Spock. So, but it feels like he's kind of getting back in his groove again. Maybe it's just me feeling that way. Amy, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm gonna need to still wait. I still am preferring Discovery Spock. I feel that's more true to what I think of a Spock. But as far as characters go for me, I am loving Ortegas. She is coming at it strong. She's like, we're not supposed to do that. What, like all of her comebacks, I love because they're unique and they're not disrespectful, because I feel that Pike and Ortegas have this relationship. And so even though it seems flippant or casual, but like when she's talking to Pike, he's totally okay with it. And I love that. I think it's sets her character apart, because I don't think anyone else is talking that flippantly to him or with him.
Yeah, she seems to have a very interesting relationship with Pike, and I really hope at some point we get an episode that explains that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would be very interesting, because there's very much a mutual respect there that they have for each other, but they can have that kind of, oh, I'm going to say something a little off kilter to you, you're going to answer back with me. But they have like I love the whole line he talks about, like surfing the black hole, and she gets kind of excited about that.
Yeah.
I
Like, oh, wow, when you put it like that, it sounds fun, you know?
Yeah. No. So, what about you, Hayley? Anybody standing out for you right now out of this episode?
I really enjoyed getting a little bit more about Hemmer. I thought that was really, really fantastic. I love his interactions with Uhura when they end up getting trapped. And, they're talking about like why he's in Starfleet. And she kind of already knows a little bit about his species, and that why are you in Starfleet? I thought you guys were all, whatever. And I loved his explanation to her, and so it was nice getting a little bit more of him, and him kind of opening up and learning to trust somebody else when his hand breaks. I thought that was really a nice touch. I do have to say, and I don't know if we'll get to it, but a lot of times when the camera would look back at Captain Pike, his expressions this episode were, I think, really wonderful for the tenseness and the seriousness of it. And, him telling La'an that, hey, no, you have to have hope, because if you don't, no one's going to perform, and people aren't going to perform how we need to. But I think even more so than the first 3 episodes, I really enjoyed how they wrote him in this episode. And again, aye, skipper, dive. I just loved it. It was great.
No, I think Anson Mount does more of some of his best acting when he's not even talking, when he just how he carries himself and his facial expression. So I completely what you're getting from there.
Hey,
go ahead. Amy.
Real quick, how are you liking? And I've talked about this before, like the casualness, it's just so different than what we've seen with Picard and Discovery. So when they come on the view screen, like Pike gets out of his seat and hops up closer to the view screen. I've never seen this before. I don't know how I like it. I'm like, oh, okay, all right. Hayley's yelling at me, so I'm gonna turn it over.
No, I'm not yelling. How often? I mean, look at the TNG crew. I mean, yes, for the first little bit, it was a little bit weird when Picard comes on and he's captain and stuff. But I mean, immediately you can tell that for the most part, they were at ease with each other. And maybe it didn't get conveyed as much, but it definitely was there. And how often does he get up and out of his chair to walk closer to the view screen to talk to someone?
A lot. He did a lot in first season. I will give you that. But like, Picard will just stand up, or most times sit down, but like he's walking to the front. And so I feel like, and especially with my 1 year of teaching online and being on camera, like if I'm going to come up closer, like is the camera that's doing is it readjusting and zooming out or zooming in? Like it really is confusing me, especially now that we're in this age of Zoom and FaceTiming. I'm like, he's walking closer to the camera. His face is going to be this big.
I think it does, though.
Yeah, I'm sure it adjusts.
Yeah, I'm sure it's just a question.
I think it's actually very much an aspect of the casualness of it is because most of the crew, it's establishing the fact this crew's been together for a long time. And I think that's an important part. And I think with Pike, the reason he is that is because Pike is an explorer. you got to look at the time difference too, from next gen to when this is even before the original series. There's so much new still things to explore for the Enterprise and for Pike. And I think we have to keep in mind too, what is Pike's mindset with the fact he knows he's got a short time? I mean, so is some of the stuff that's feels a little more nonchalant just because Pike is he's going to make the most of it. He's going to enjoy it, and he's not and Pike is going to do it his way. Now, he's not going rogue. He's still going to follow within the realm of Starfleet regulations, but obviously we've already seen where he's not afraid to push that envelope, and not in a bad way, but when he feels like it's like going to be most constructive, whether it was in the first episode with the speech he gives or in the last episode with protecting Una when she's discovered to be a Larian. It's like, don't give me that. I don't accept that. So I think that's one of the things I like about Pike so much is that he's not quite so by the book, and he's not that serious. And I think also some of this stuff is things that we kind of see in Kirk too. And I think that's kind of some things that the influence Pike had on Kirk becoming, as from Kirk's time on the Enterprise before he became captain. So I think there's some interesting things that are playing out there with Pike, and I think it's Anson Mount's personality too. I mean, I think that's just they're letting him kind of dictate some too, and I think it's giving him some freedoms.
You do bring up a good point with that time period, because Archer was pretty familiar with his crew as well. We saw them. He invited him in to have dinner with him in his quarters. And we see that Pike does that. And, there's a common place with Kirk and his crew. So, yeah, I think it is maybe the time frame. Okay, I'm going to adjust that. Thank you.
That's what we're here for. But Kevin's not here to use his security methods to bring up some trivia, but I have found a couple of very interesting pieces of trivia, guys. So first and foremost, the red alert notification seen on the main view screen is the same one used in the original series. So I found that very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And a little fun piece of trivia. When discussing options for fighting the Gorn with limited weapons, Ortegas asked, what do we do, throw luggage at them? Ultimately, that's what they did, ejecting the replacement atmospheric processor from the cargo bay on
I didn't catch that. Oh, my gosh. What is what they do?
So, yes, a little bit of fun there. But, guys, I want to start getting into some away missions, so I am turning on the transporter. Okay, guys, away mission 1. I'm going to cross my streams again a little bit because I'm going to call away mission 1 Fear is the Mind Killer, because I think fear was a big aspect of the main storyline of this episode, because it was a lot of it was, and we haven't talked about yet, was La'an overcoming some of her own fear, which had kind of paralyzed her and made her shut things off because of everything she had been through with the Gorn. And she had to come over her own fears with the help of a little mind meld to help find a solution for this. But I also thought there was another one aspect where fear of the unknown a little bit with Uhura, in the aspect of she's going into engineering for her first time, and she's working with Hemmer, who's so used to being able to use all of his senses. And here she is having to basically, because of Hemmer's broken hand, do something that was out of her realm, and having to Hemmer having to trust in her because he's used to being kind of doing everything on his own, and her having to basically, work outside for her comfort zone as well. So I thought overcoming fear really did feel like it was a main theme kind of running through this episode. Plus, you just have the natural fear of, here's this alien race in the Gorn that you don't know much about, but from the descriptions we get, they're much more horrific than we ever originally thought. So, guys, I want to kind of get your thoughts on what you, if you were seeing what I was seeing with that mission, or were you picking it up a little differently? Amy?
Yeah, I can see fear as a theme with this. And La'an, I think, is portrayed to use her fear in a productive way, but still is a hindrance, because when she's describing the Gorn, I feel like she's very strategic, and the Gorn are going to hunt us. They will never give up. They are relentless. And then Pike gets to turn that, use that against them instead of it being against, the Enterprise crew. And she's got this strategic way of thinking about the fear, because she's trying to, what I feel, gain control of that situation. Like, okay, this is what the Gorn are doing to me. How can I get out? How did I get out? How are we going to get out? But it still is a hindrance because she's not seeing, and Pike points it out, not seeing the possibilities. What's the miracle? How can we? And so I feel that with that fear, I think I'll just end that there.
Okay. With what you're saying, Hayley or Amy, I get where you're coming from with that, and I think the aspect of it is she hides her fear behind the strategic, tough exterior that she shows, but because she's holding all that fear inside and not letting it out, everything's a kind of almost a mechanical response for her. And I think that's what Pike was trying to get out of here, is like, you know what, you've got to be more. You've got to let I want you to tell the truth, but you still need to give hope out there. And I think because La'an, because of her fear, really just it's mechanical. It's almost, in a way, it's almost Vulcan-like because it's unemotional. And her fear is killing her. It's shutting off her emotions, and then she becomes so one streamlined on something that there's no ability to adapt there. And I think where with Pike is like, hey, you're trying to create a miracle. And to do that, sometimes you have to have the ability to let your emotions kind of make you see a bigger picture and adapt. And I think, again, when you go to the mind meld and she faces her fears a little bit, and it opens up her ability to access these memories that she's buried so much to protect herself from her own fears. So that's kind of how I saw it. Hayley, what about you?
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because, she does say, we are prey to them. And, and in this, and I didn't quite catch it. And then later I realized it was accurate. It is understandable that fear would be a thing. The Gorn use holograms to lure them. That's how they got the Enterprise there. They pretended and made it seem like that there was actually still any colonists left when they weren't. And so that was kind of interesting. And I think she is. I think it's interesting to see La'an. She's trying to be a Vulcan without going through, the act of Kolinar. And so she's trying very hard to control her emotions. And there's a point where if you try too hard, you're really not doing it at all. You're not effective with it. And there's a degree of, sometimes you have to let your emotions control you in order to process them and process what's going on. And I think that's where she was struggling in this episode. She didn't want to let her fear get the better of her because she thought that she would just break down. But in reality, she really needed to agree to let that kind of take her for a minute, because that's what we see in the mind meld, where she says, okay, I'll give in and I will relive these memories that have been flashing since the beginning of this episode. And that's really when she really gained full control.
I think another interesting aspect of it when we talk about fear, because they made it very clear that, like, even Ortega's and a few of the other people on the bridge, they were in fear. And yet you had Pike, who was kind of like this reassuring thing. And they knew, like, okay, Pike wasn't showing fear. I don't need to show fear. And I think that even played over in the medical side, in the times when they're in the med bay, when they're having to go to 21st century. Like, how's your sewing, nurse?
Oh my God.
But
no, it is archaeological medicine.
That's
I don't.
Great line.
This
that was
doesn't
great.
even make sense to me. That threw me out because I'm like, you are teaching medicine without learning how to stitch. I mean, why is it that Nurse Chapel was the only one? Because she practiced archaeological medicine? There's no way. No, I don't buy it.
No, because I think there is we even see it ourselves. We become reliant on technologies, and considering how long, you think about how long it had probably been since they had done any kind of actual hands-on surgery, in the timeline. I can imagine that they probably don't teach stitches and things like that going that far in the future when you have that technology there.
Yeah, think about
Hayley?
this, Amy. So our timeline is now essentially, I think it's Discovery, Strange New Worlds, TOS, and then Enterprise, or is it Enterprise and
No.
TOS?
Enterprise, Strange New
So-
Worlds, and Discovery concurrent.
Yes.
And then
Yeah, okay.
TOS.
Yeah.
Okay. So even in Discovery, which is pre everything else, which we've had since the 60s, they didn't even do manual stitching. So who knows where, I mean, my thought is if we go after this, okay, so we just had Picard that ended in next year, 2024. We see Soong, who's going to start the eugenics wars. Duh. And then I think between the eugenics wars, World War III, I think that's when this technology has kind of started to come about, where we don't have to use manual stitches to fix things. And so it would make sense that no one Discovery on would even know about it unless they were interested in it. It's much like, with the new films and classical music, which is Beastie Boys in 80s, 90s is now classical music, and Kirk has an interest in it. Or Bashir and his interest in, building model sets and the Alamo and things like that. I think unless it's like a curiosity, no one really is going to focus on that. So I like that Chapel had this curiosity in like older forms of medicine because it still is relevant for this reason. Let's say something happens, you can't access and you're running out of supplies and you can't access and use the tools that you normally use because the power is cut for some reason. You still need to heal people. So I get that, like what you're saying of like it should still be a thing that's taught, but how much of what I was taught in school, my daughter's not taught in school, and how much, like her grandkids aren't going to learn in school because things have changed. And so it's kind of become an irrelevant thing. Look at my surgery that I had. They didn't stitches. They did internal stitches.
Yeah. I
Dissolvable
get
they
that.
stitches.
They used glue.
Yeah.
There was no
yes.
external. So, I mean, even now we kind of have forms of it where it's still used to a degree, but not as much as it was.
Well, I hear what you're saying, like building ships
Yeah.
and stuff like those are, like Tom Paris with his building the car,
Yeah.
archaic, of course,
Yeah.
don't you? But I argue that those are hobbies and skills are different. And you do learn the progression. Like you learn to splinter because you want to help the bone if for triage. Like you're gonna learn the basic things, like to show how it's done. Like even Jordy was like, "Oh yeah, we learned your equations for warp drive and the warp field. Like we studied those, even though that's archaic. Like there's something you
But it was
learn
still relevant.
exactly. So is stitching.
Well, okay,
I'm
so
sorry, it is, and you can disagree, but
no,
I
I'm not.
appreciate the description.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's another thought process though. In a modern medical facility, like for that time frame, you really think they're going to have needle and thread for stitching? I was actually surprised they even had it.
I'm not
To be
saying
honest with
that,
you.
but I'm saying that doctor knows and had a introduction to needle and thread. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I can.
It's a skill.
Yeah. Like I said, sometimes we let skills erode because there's something fancier that makes it easier for us. That's
True,
kind of what I'm
yeah.
saying there. But
I
but
get
it's
it,
a valid
like,
it's
yeah.
a valid point. It's a
Yep.
valid
Yeah.
point, Amy.
Yeah.
It's a
No,
valid
yeah,
point.
I totally agree. Yeah, I
Yeah.
get what you're saying.
So
Makes sense to me. I just, but
Yeah.
for the episode's sake, it was
Right.
hilarious.
yeah.
Yes.
I was like, did he say archaeological medicine?
yeah.
So guys, I want to move on to Away Mission 2, which is still getting to know your crew. And in this case, it's haunted by your past and learning an old new enemy. So I'm putting the focus on two things. First and foremost is La'an Noonien-Singh, who was very much a big part of this episode. That she was our focus character. And I want to go to you first on this, Amy, because I know you have not been a big fan of hers so far this series. People have been kind of mixed on her. But we really got to see a little bit more humanizing of her. And I mean, we had heard what she went through, but now we actually got to kind of see it in some of her memory flashbacks and just how powerful the effect and how horrifying it really was, which also ties into the fact, and we'll get a little bit more deeper in this, what they're doing with the Gorn right now and what looks to be setting up. But let's focus on La'an for right now. So Amy, do you feel like, I'm not saying you made a complete turn on the character, but do you feel like the character is a little bit more relatable now than what she had been through the first few episodes?
Yes, absolutely. And it was because of the mind meld with Spock. And with that transformation in her arc of finally realizing that she's not alone, I think is what helped her heal. I think she had gone through and tried to do all the things that she thought was best to try and overcome her trauma that was, that she had with the Gorn and the camps there. But I think she just felt so alone. She was the only survivor. Like, there's no one that feels that. And even when she was talking to number one, like, she's like, how come you didn't tell me that you felt discriminated against? I've had to live with this. And they sort of had this little, headbutting. But again, because La'an felt so alone. And then when she got to the mind meld with Spock and she realized you had a sibling that sacrificed. I had a sibling that sacrificed. And that moment where she felt I'm not alone, I think that was that transformation. And she had so much loneliness from that explained the first 3 episodes, in my opinion, because she wasn't making connections, because she had these walls up, because she felt that no one understood her. And to have that connection, I think that's what broke. And yeah, I am getting more and more into her character. I can relate to that because when you've gone through trauma, and it's not going to be the exact same, but when you know someone who has had a similar experience, it lifts the burden and it's like, oh, someone understands me. And I think that's what we saw in this episode. And it was very beautiful, that mind meld.
What about you, Hayley?
Yeah, I can totally understand that. And of what Amy was saying, although I do have to say there are times where, because she put up those walls, she wasn't allowing anybody to understand her and to say, I have something similar. And so there's that degree of, that's her responsibility too, is to say, hey, I've been through this, or I felt this way, and whatnot. And so, yeah, I've been through that too. I did have with the mind meld, and when she says, oh, you've lost somebody, it took me back to Harry Potter when he's going and he's talking with Snape and he's having Snape enter his mind and try to block him. And then he uses it. And so Snape sees some of what Harry sees, and then he flips it and he saw what his dad did to Snape when they were kids at school. That I immediately went there, and I forget what it's called in Harry Potter. But anyway, so that's kind of where my brain went. And then I was like, oh crap, is that going to be a thing? Because no one else is supposed to know outside of Spock and Pike and number one what happened, and it's all hush hush because they're not supposed to talk about it. And so I was like, oh snap. But I do like that she kind of opened up a little bit to let somebody else say, hey, what is your experience? I have something similar. Because that's a big part of it, is if you keep those walls up, no one's going to know, and then that just stays the same. I'm hoping that her character will soften a little bit more, because I feel like she's been very, very one note and very harsh until now.
you guys both brought up the moment that stood out for me in this too, was with the mind meld. They could have easily just been lazy in the writing and just gone, oh, okay, Leon got what she wanted out of it, and that was it. But then they did focus on the fact that it's a bleeding of two minds. So she's going to pick up thoughts from Spock, and especially with Spock seeing what Leon go through, made his own thoughts go to Burnham. And I really liked that they didn't forget about that, and they actually used that as part of that. And I think it was a brilliant move by the writers. I also like the fact too that I think even though it was Spock with the mind meld that really kind of got her to access the memories that face her fear, her biggest fear. Truthfully, she's facing her biggest fear yet again, and where a lot of people would have just closed up, she put enough trust in the Spock to let that go. But I also think that some of it was Pike and a little bit of Pike's influence with the conversation they had, where he's like, "You still got to give people hope, and you tell me the truth, but just remember, you can't be in such a negative fashion that you're destroying the hope of your crew." And I really think that was also something that really resonated with her as well. So I think that was very well done. And I think it definitely is a point of major character development for Leon. I think there's still a lot of hurdles to get over, but I think that's the character herself. And I think that's the journey of this character that they're going to have. I also think they did a couple of interesting little things again with Hemmer and Uhura, and developing both of them, where Hemmer, from what we've seen so far with him, is that he's like, I don't rely on anybody but myself. And that's part, and we find out that's also part of the nature of his species a little bit as well. And again, the developing of Uhura, and I think this is one of the things I'm really liking about this show, is we're seeing all these things that happen that make her the Uhura we first saw when we watched the original series. And and the building blocks that are being put into that character, who already came in as a strong character, but now seeing her develop more communication with working with others, with a little bit of her own hubris and things like that. So I've really liked what they've done there as well. So I give you ladies a chance. Either of you have some thoughts on that part of the storyline?
Yeah, that Hemmer and Uhura, that is the exact, every education conference I've gone to, like your group work, it's your team building activity. All right, so you describe and I'll do. Absolutely loved it. Brilliant. And you saw I totally envisioned my students, because you've got one student, I don't want to do this. This is dumb. And then the other student's like, well, we only have 20 minutes, so we need to get going, because what else are we going to do? We don't want to fail. That was the exact exchange. Hemmer's like, I don't like working together. I don't like working with others. And then Uhura's like, well, what else are we going to do? Your hand's broken. I've got functioning hands. Let's do this. She's got the excitement. She's pulling him along, and they finally do work together. And oh my goodness, they're successful. Ta-da! Like, great team building experience. I saw my students in it perfectly, and I loved it, and I smiled.
Yeah, it was super great. I think Uhura had like a baseball reference when she was pulling up the rod. Anyway, but and I liked that when we got to the point where they're in the black hole, essentially, and they both, he reaches out and grabs her hand, while they're, because I can only imagine, that would be so tense and stressful. But this is kind of where my other favorite line comes from is, Hemmer says, I will not fight for Starfleet, but I will fight for its ideals. And I think that is so fantastic. And I think almost that is what the entire crew is as well. Like, they're going to fight for the ideals, not necessarily for Starfleet, but for its ideals and what it stands for. And I loved it. It was great. And I like that Uhura is still not sure of herself. She's still not sure, even after, helping Hemmer and everything like that. And he, in their conversation when they're putting on their suits, and he asks her, they're talking about, have you lived fulfilled life? Are you happy with where you're at? And she still isn't quite sure where she wants to be. And I like that, because what 20 some odd year old really knows where they want to be in their life? Like, you really don't. because psychology tells us we don't know who we are. We've just moved out of our parents' house. We've maybe lived on our own for a little bit. We don't have firm set ideals, beliefs until we're in our 30s, really. And even then, they still kind of change a little bit. But like your 20s, you're discovering yourself. So of course she's not sure of herself. And I like that.
Yeah. You mentioned too about them serving the ideals of Starfleet, but not Starfleet. I think that's something we've seen almost in every episode. Again, with Pike's speech in the first episode, I think especially with how Pike handled Una, again, going back, they believe in the ideals of Starfleet, not necessarily what Starfleet, what command is from Starfleet is going to say. And I think that's going to be something that they can play on later on. I'm going to be interested to see how that plays off. But guys, I want to talk about too what it looks like they're doing. And it looks like they're setting up the Gorn to be maybe one of the major threats for Strange New Worlds. And guys, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm curious when we finally see the Gorn, what they look like, obviously with more modern makeup and technology and what they can do with them. But they're doing a good job of making them real creepy right out of the gate without even really seeing him, other than our image of Kirk back in the day. But yeah, the Gorn, the fear factor of the Gorn has gone up tenfold, Amy.
Yeah. And I like that we didn't see them, but we saw their ship and like how spinning and like how cool it is. Like, ooh, that'd be hard to fight because they are so flexible and spinning. And yeah, it almost sort of reminds me of, I know I say this, the Borg, but like they're sort of setting them up. Like this is going to be the foe, but I sort of hope not, because I like the episodic nature and it's like, okay, this is the Gorn. Let's come back to them. But I don't want it to be the whole story, which I sort of think they might do. It just, we'll get these scary parts and then we'll have some nice people and scary ones and nice ones. So
I could see a two-parter maybe in the second season or something like that if they wanted to go that route, kind of, like what Next Generation would do from time to time. I could see them going that but I don't see that. I don't see them taking Strange New Worlds and making it themes throughout the season like they do with Picard, and I think they're intentionally trying not to do that. But Hayley, as our TOS expert on ship right now, what do you think? What do you think of what they're doing with the Gorn right now? Because like I said, the Gorn kind of probably not going to look. I'm thinking they're going to look a little different than what we saw back in the day.
Well, I think yes, but I think it's just going to be because technology has changed and advanced, that obviously it's not going to look ridiculous like it did. I mean, honestly, like if you watch TOS now, it just looks ridiculous. It's like when I started pulling up Batman from '66 with Adam West, it looks silly. But I do think overall it's going to have the same effect, because we've already seen that, we had a Gorn skeleton, a skull. So we kind of know that essentially they're going to look the same. I think visually they'll just look better. As far as them being scary, we never really kind of talked about them in TOS. We never had that much except for the episode. Arena, but at the same time, we already knew that they were a foe and it was scary and they were bad. We didn't know how bad, but again, they didn't really dive into that in TOS. It never really was super, super deep in a lot of things like a lot of our Trek and television is now. And so I like that it's adding to the story. I don't think it's changing their story whatsoever, but I think it's adding to it. And like Amy, I hope that they're not going to do kind of something similar where, okay, we're just going to be encountering the Gorn like a ton. I would say more along the lines of like Voyager and how we had random chance encounters with species 8472, but it was kind of just here and there in their, exploration and journey of getting home. Of course, they would encounter him again, but it wasn't something that was a consistent thing. And so I really hope that, yes, we do have La'an saying, they've expanded their hunting grounds. At one point, do the Metron step in and say, hey, yeah, we're stopping you? Because, Arena, if you haven't watched it, listeners, please go back, watch TOS Arena. You'll totally get what I'm saying. And so, I mean, are they going to step in and do something? Because we've yet to encounter them, but they've got to be out there if we've just encountered the Gorn. So, again, I think it's just kind of adding to their story. Their ship is definitely very interesting, and I'm not exactly sure, like, the big one overall, how tactical that is. Honestly, like, you've got spaces where, a ship could fly through and take out part of your ship because you've got these weird arms and stuff. But it's definitely going to be interesting.
Yeah. I'm just going to say this about the Gorn. I love the aspect of the fear they're playing up on it. And as watching this episode, and I was paying close attention to how they were portraying the Gorn as far as it reminded me of 3 classic Alien things. When they're going through when you have the flashback memories with Leon and you see that everything's a little slimy, a little bit of gooey. It kind of reminds me of Aliens. Then when they are talking to the young girl and she talks about the sound they made, kind of reminded me of Predator. But then when they talk about us being the smorgasbord, I went back to the classic 1980s V series where we were the food for the visitors. And they kind of combine things from all 3 of those and have dropped them as hints of what are things about the Gorn. And I loved it because I love those kind of throwback things. So I found that very interesting. Amy, you have a look on your face.
No, that clicking, TNG schisms. There's no other. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
That's what I thought. But again, I'm not a horror, sci-fi, scary movie person. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, well, you know what, though? I'm really fascinated. I'm definitely in on the Gorn as far as I'm like, Amy, I don't want to see him turn into the Borg, but I definitely would like to see where we have some more random encounters and the threat kind of hanging there now that they're expanding their hunting zone. So, yeah, it's going to be very interesting. But for now, we're going to take a quick break, tell you what else is going on around the Fandom Podcast Network. And when we come back, it's time to talk the Ready Room.
Thank you for listening. We hope you're enjoying this podcast. We'd like to continue to feed your ears by inviting you to listen to these other great shows on the Fandom Podcast Network. It starts with our flagship show, Culture Clash, discussing the latest in entertainment pop culture. Bloody Kings, Immortals Take Notice, our show covering the entire Highlander universe. Couch Potato Theaters, where we celebrate our favorite movies. Time Warp, the Fandom Flashback podcast discussing a year in movies and our favorite retro movie and TV pop culture topics. Good Evening, discussing all things Alfred Hitchcock. Union Federation, our Star Trek and Orville show. Hair Metal, the 80s and early 90s rock metal podcast. Type 40, our show covering the time-traveling Doctor Who universe with host Dan Hadley. Lethal Mullet, an 80s and 90s action film podcast with host Adam P. O'Brien. Also check out the Lethal Mullet Network for more great podcasts. What a Piece of Junk, a Star Wars podcast with hosts Scott, Derek, and Nathan. Making Treks, a Star Trek podcast, a deep dive into the final frontier with host Mark Newbold and Adam P. O'Brien. And check out our newest shows, The Fandom Show, our monthly Fandom Podcast Network live YouTube exclusive show about the month's hottest topics in fandom, and the FPN True Believers MCU podcast, discussing the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the related Marvel television and streaming MCU universe, including the connections to the original Marvel comics. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on several platforms. Please subscribe to the Fandom Podcast Network YouTube channel to receive notifications of new podcast episodes and live events. You can enjoy all of the Fandom Podcast Network audio podcasts on our master feed at fpnet.podbean.com. The Fandom Podcast Network is on all major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcast and iTunes. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on Facebook. You can email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com. You can also find the Fandom Podcast Network on Instagram at Fandom Podcast Network and on Twitter at FanPod Network. Thank you for listening, and remember, respect others and enjoy your fandom.
And we're back, and hopefully you're enjoying everything, not only on the Fandom Podcast Network, but on the BQN as well, because, you know, and more and more crossover happening as you can now find Galaxy Class and all good things on the Fandom Podcast Network master feed too, as well as Union Federation on the BQN. It's all one big assimilation. It's a beautiful thing. It's voluntary. It's the new style podcast.
That's right. The new style.
So guys, we're going to talk about the Ready Room this week. And in the Ready Room this week, actress Christina Chong and co-executive producer and writer Davy Perez joined Wil Wheaton and talked to him about bringing the Gorn back into the Star Trek universe. Plus, they went a little behind the scenes on Strange New World visuals and real science used in this week's episode. Now, I want to start off with okay, so we have our tradition. Hayley fulfilled it this week. She did not watch the Ready Room. You know, it's a tradition.
Yeah,
one member of the crew
it
does not
is.
watch the Ready Room. But I do want to talk about this, Amy, because I think this is actually really important. I want to talk about in the creating the visuals, you're talking about using the virtual wall. And I know we've talked in the past and brought up how in both Discovery and Picard, there were times when they used a virtual wall and it was a little obvious. I don't see that with Strange New Worlds. It's like they've figured out some things with Strange New World. Like, I know they use the virtual wall when they're in engineering and stuff like that, but it just looks so much more seamless. And I don't know if it's because it's a little brighter or what's happening there, but it doesn't feel like there's that, like, just that little bit of off that was kind of there at times with Discovery and with Picard compared to, I mean, they just seem like they've kind of figured it out for Strange New Worlds.
You know, I think I would agree with you with Discovery. I don't know, for some reason I feel like I know when I'm looking at the AR wall, but with Picard, I don't think I could tell you like too often when it was used. So I would say Picard and Strange New Worlds are pretty similar that way. I will give you that with Discovery. I am, however, tired of Wil Wheaton asking the actor, well, how do you like acting against this, the screen? They're all going to love it. They all say the same thing. What different things could they say? I don't know. So I'm just sort of getting tired of the same question from just hearing it over.
As far as the question point, yeah, I agree. But I did like how, because I think it's because it's a developing technology. It's something that's good that they revisit with each show to see how each show is using it. You know, obviously this really started with Star Trek and The Mandalorian, and it just boomed from there. But I really do feel like, compared to Discovery, like you said, I think especially Discovery, I think there's a couple moments in Picard with the stained glass and that room that I felt like it felt a little bit off-putting. But here it just seems seamless. It doesn't I don't get distracted and like taken out of a moment like there was a couple of times in Discovery that it happened. So I really like that. They had a great interview too with Christina Chong and Davy Perez, and I like the fact that Christina Chong definitely recognized she was wearing a green outfit, so she felt she was Gorn appropriate for this episode of the Ready Room. But one of the things, Amy, I've liked when they've had a writer on from Strange New Worlds is just they seem to have such a different, I know it's some of the same writers, but they just seem to have such a different energetic approach when you hear them talk about writing for an episode of Strange New Worlds compared to even Picard or Discovery. Is it just me noticing that, or are you guys in the episodes you've seen, are you noticing that, Amy?
Yeah, the writers that we are talking to, that we get to, have interactions with either, through the Ready Room or like at conventions, really, they love their show and they love Trek. And so it just comes through. And how Perez and Chong were working off each other, and how he's like, it's easy to write when the actors are so great, and the actors are like, it's easy to act when the lines are so good. And so they really, complement each other as they should. And I like seeing that the writers are listening to, and I say listening in air quotes, because they're seeing what the actors are doing with their writing and then can feed into that, which only makes it better. And I think that communication and the working together is a great tool that maybe some of the classic Trek didn't get. And I can see that difference there.
One of the things I find very interesting, because it came up again with this interview with Christina, was apparently the writers, producers, and directors on Strange New Worlds were very devious with their audition techniques, because yet again, Christina's like, I have no idea who I was auditioning for. And I really think it was a wise choice, because I think it reflects in this casting for this, because when they auditioned, they were true auditions, because they didn't know exactly the person they were playing. So they kind of just played it in a natural what they thought, not, oh, what's a preconceived notion, because they've all said pretty much the same thing. Like if I would have known I was Noonan, Noonien-Singh, I probably would have done my audition different. The actress who plays Uhura said the same thing. Heck, even Anson Mount said the same thing. So I really think it's proving out that sometimes it's better to not know who you're auditioning for.
Well, and even when Christina Chong was saying, well, Wil Wheaton pointed out, this is the first mind meld of the series. Like, it's pretty significant. And kudos to her for saying, yeah, I didn't do any homework. I didn't study. I wanted it to be real. Like, what is this? Because that's exactly like the character. She wouldn't know what a mind meld is. Like, so that experience was fresh and it came through. So I like that.
Yeah, I like how she said too. Yeah, I didn't realize just how important it actually was until after we had filmed the scene, and especially because it was Spock. It's
Not
like,
important at all.
Willie's like, yeah, he's like, no, you don't understand. It's like you're not only getting up to do a mind meld, you're getting to do a mind meld with Spock. I would have been running to the chance to do that. So, I think that getting that ingenuous answer, and I think it made for much, like you said, Amy, a much more honest and genuine performance to come out of her in that too. And I thought she was a great interview. And I've got to say, I'm literally looking forward to hearing about the new conventions when the Strange New World cast can be there and actually talk about things now and see how they seem like they would be like Discovery, where they're really tight and are having a lot of fun. And I mean, we've already kind of seen that with Anson Mount, Una, and Ethan Peck already, just because they've been able to. But now that we've got this whole, I'm really looking forward to see how the crew comes across in person as a whole. I'm very fascinated by that, because it just seems like they're just as tight as any other crew we've seen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So, I wanted to, can I just talk about Dr. Erin McDonald, the science thing?
Absolutely. But we have, as she's a doctor, but we have Hayley Stoddard. I mean,
yes.
we don't get
No, but Erin knows her stuff.
Yeah.
That's what she does.
Yeah,
I just am like an amateur. I love it. And it's interesting. So, yeah. Please, please go
Dr. Erin was amazing. And again, it was because of her explanation as to what was going on that I actually understood the episode better, because I didn't understand what the Enterprise was doing. And because there was multiple galactic phenomena going on. Like, I'm used to, okay, here's a black hole. In another episode, here's a brown star. They combined them. And so not only you're getting this black hole where light, is being sucked in, and so nothing's coming out. And like, she explained that phenomenon. And then you had this black hole that pulled in this brown star into its orbit. So you have the brown star orbiting the black hole, and they are coming in to go around the brown star that's around the black hole. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so then to have them do the slingshot, I understood that because they were in this orbit. And so they could sling. And then I also understood more like the cargo bay, what they were doing, throwing luggage at them, because I didn't understand that too. And the visual and the whole Einstein and everything that Dr. Erin explained made the episode make sense. And again, that is sort of a criticism. Like, did I really need? Why couldn't I understand that before? Maybe it's on me. I
don't think so. It was pretty sciencey, but I think, but kudos to them for being able to recognize that and then put that into the ready.
Yeah.
So if it becomes it's on you if you don't make the effort to say, okay, maybe if I watch the Ready Room where they talk about some of the things they were talking about in the episode, maybe it enlightens me more. But if you choose not to, then that's.
But not everyone has access to the Ready Room. It is a U.S. Yeah.
Well, with it being on
about the UK
with it being on YouTube, they can access it. So, but guys, too, real quick, I like the fact that they used the trivia this week. First time photon torpedoes were mentioned, obviously, in the original the arena episode was the first time photon torpedoes were ever mentioned. So, and you got to be careful of those falling photon torpedoes because, they're...
See, and that part I did understand because they had exposition and they said because of the gravity, because of where they were in relation to the gravity of the hull, that it would pull the torpedo down. I understood that. That was the right amount of explaining for me.
Well, and Spock was being, I think, extra Spocky in this episode, which is why they wrote in La'an saying, "Do you ever speak plain English? Do you ever just make sense?" It's the same thing of Big Bang Theory and them just looking at Sheldon like, "What? Please talk to a normal human being, right?" And so I think there was that aspect of it. But I liked that because he was being Spock.
Yeah.
He was being Spock from the original series and not explaining himself and then looking at you like, why do I have to explain myself? I shouldn't have to explain myself. Just do what I say. So
Exactly. And that
yeah.
makes a great transition into what is coming up next for Strange New Worlds, where Spock Amok is the title for next week's episode. And in the Ready Room, they show a little episode, and it looks like we have a little Spock versus Spock going, where he's having some kind of confrontation between his human side and his Vulcan side in quite a literal battle sense. So, and we get to return with Spock's fiance, which I am very excited about.
Yes, I was about to say, I'm going to bring up to Pring because, yes, we get to see her again. So I'm excited.
And she will be a guest on the next week's Ready Room as well. So.
Yes.
So that is going to make.
I'm immediately hearing the do from Joe.
And they have the shaking of the
bells.
Yes, they have that.
Yeah,
that's great.
Yep.
With that, guys, I am going to open up some subspace signals as we get ready to close out this episode. Well, first and foremost, thank you to my wonderful crew, as always, for joining me to discuss this episode of Strange New Worlds on episode 129 of Union Federation, where we covered Strange New Worlds episode 4, Memento Mori. Guys, thank you again so much. It's always a pleasure to podcast with such an amazing crew. We should be getting our chief security officer back next week. In fact, he might be getting a promotion too, at least for part of the show. We're going to talk about that in here in just a few minutes, but there's a lot of great places you can find the Union Federation podcast, of course, on its home on the Fandom Podcast Network, on the master feed for the podcast version at fpnet.podbean.com, or the video version of this podcast will be up on our YouTube channel as well. So go to YouTube and search for the Fandom Podcast Network. And of course, now too, you can find the Union Federation podcast on where, Miss Nelson?
Well, you can find us on Twitter at Twitter and Instagram at BQN Podcasts.
Yes, because the Union Federation is now part of the BQN as well. It's a beautiful thing. Also, too, you can find it on all major podcast catchers as well for the Fandom Podcast Network. You can find myself, Kyle, on Twitter at AKyleW or on Instagram at AKyleFandom. Hayley, where can people find you on social media?
Well, when I'm not surfing the Coriolis effect of a brown dwarf star to avoid gravitational redshift, you can find me on Twitter at Trekkie01D.
I need a whole new Ready Room to clarify her whole explanation there, Amy. And where can people find you personally on social media, Miss Nelson?
Well, over on BQN, you can find me hosting Galaxy Class and all good things. I personally am on Twitter at Miss Amy Nelson.
And of course, you can find Kevin on Instagram and Twitter at Spartan_Phoenix. You can find the Union Federation podcast on Twitter at UnionFed Podcast. We'll look ahead, guys, into the Orb of Prophecy. It's here. There's no more countdown. The countdown is over. Next weekend, we are aiming at Sunday to do a live episode of the Union Federation because the Orville is back. Season 3, the Orville New Horizons, exclusive to Hulu, will be here. We have been anxiously awaiting this. We are very excited. Mr. Reitzel will be taking over the captain's chair once the Orville starts. We will, of course, still be talking Strange New Worlds as well. But guys, I'm so excited for this. The Orville is back. I'm ready to get back. I found my left leg between this week and last. It's reattached, regrown, however you want to do it. But this crew that we fell in love with is back for this whole new reiteration. Looks like we got a little bit more money into the show. We got a nice, fresh new bridge, some looks, and it looks like it's picking up right where we left off, as the first episode is called Electric Sheep, and it's going to deal with them dealing with the fallout of what happened with the Kalons at the end of season 2. So, guys, I just got to throw it to you. Amy, I know you're really excited that the Orville is finally back.
Yes, and they need to address what's going on with Kalon. So I am very excited. And like, where's Isaac in this? And then seeing the trailer and the previews, like we're getting some bad Kalon and some good Kalon. Like, so there's going to be some pretty awesome stuff. I'm very excited.
Yes, but about you, Hayley, the Orville's back.
Yeah, I feel like I'm probably going to go back and watch the last episode at least because it's been so long, and I don't tend to rewatch a ton of stuff. So
I'm going to just throw it out as a suggestion. Probably watch the last 3 because the last 3 are the 2-parter, and then that.
Yes.
So,
but I am looking forward to it. I'm excited, just because where I haven't felt super close to some of the newer Trek stuff, I'm excited to have something else new to watch.
yeah, exactly. So with that, guys, we will be back. Like I said, start watching our social media feeds, both here and on the BQM, because we are planning to make this a live show. So we will have some links and get you all the information there as well. But again, thank you so much for joining us on this mission. Until next time, we will see everybody soon, and hailing frequencies are now closed.